Hello and welcome back to Sounds Like Sam. This episode is presented to you by Bullseye Fantasy Football. Football is back, therefore the fantasy football season is approaching. Around the NFL, training camps are beginning and the excitement of what is to come this year keeps coming. As a podcast announcement, I plan to release a new 10 to 15 minute podcast episode every Monday throughout the 2021 NFL season. So stick around and listen to every episode. So that means if you listen to Sounds Like Sam on Spotify, Apple Music, or any other platforms, make sure you set your notifications on to get updates about the show. This season, I plan to start at the very beginning of what fantasy football is and share the basics about it with you. Then, as the season progresses, I want to give you all my recommendations and inputs to help you win your league. Topics I'd like to cover over the season include the basics of fantasy football, how to prep for drafting, draft strategies, who to target in drafts, fantasy breakout candidates, my don't draft list, what the waiver wire is and how to manage it, weekly waiver wire ads you should consider, news, and much more. So in today's episode, like I said, I will be starting all the way at the beginning of the fantasy football realm, answering frequently asked questions involving the basics of fantasy football. Starting from the top, what is fantasy football? Fantasy football is a game where you draft an imaginary team of real, current NFL football players, and every week of the NFL regular season, your team will match up head-to-head with other fantasy teams in your league. Essentially, you join a fantasy league on a platform like NFL.com, Yahoo, ESPN, or another platform, either with a group of friends or with a bunch of random people, and the objective of your team is to win your championship, and in some cases, just to not lose. So people play for money. At the beginning of the season, you'll pay an entry fee. That money will most likely go to the cash prize winnings for the season. I've also played in leagues where the teams that scores the highest amount of points for that week gets $10. Then there are leagues where the whole goal is to just not lose. In this case, the loser of the league has to do something stupid or embarrassing for losing their league, and the winner of the league gets to pick what the loser does. How are points scored in fantasy football? Points are based off of your fantasy player's actual in-game stats, but depending on what point scoring league you play in, the scoring rules differ. So for a standard point league, only yards and touchdowns really determine your player's score. And in most cases, 10 receiving yards or rushing yards will equal 1 point. And this can go for really any player, including quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. 25 passing yards would equal 1 point. Rushing or receiving touchdown would equal 6 points. A passing touchdown would equal 4 points. And a fumble or interception, as well as a fumble recovery, could all be worth minus 2 points. So, and PPR leagues is basically the same thing as a standard league, except the one big difference is that every reception, they get 1 point for that reception added to their score. And there are half PPR league is basically the same thing. One big difference is that every reception equals half a point. Where is the best place to play fantasy football? There are a lot of platforms to use when playing fantasy football. Some examples would be, ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, NFL.com, Sleeper. I've only used ESPN, CBS, and Sleeper, but I have heard good things about Yahoo and NFL.com. Of the three I have used, my favorite has been CBS, mostly because I like the way their stats and summaries are given each week. They'll rank every team based on their power rankings. They essentially write an article powered by AI after each week, and they're just really fun to read and really fun to look forward to. It's just really unique aspect of that platform and that kind of stands out from others, whereas ESPN more recognized ones besides Yahoo, but I will say for ESPN it's just it's not as customizable as other platforms, but it is an easy one to use. How do fantasy drafts work? Well, there are 3 different types of drafts: a straight draft, a snake draft, and an auction draft. A straight draft is when each team drafts in the same order every single round. If you were the first pick in your league, you would stay the first pick in every single round. Whereas a snake draft, the order snakes around. So after everyone picks in the first round, the picks are reversed. In the first round, it would go first pick to last pick, and then last to first in the second, and then first to last in the third, and so on and so forth. In an auction draft, a player is placed on the draft slot to be drafted, and you virtually bid on the player, and the team with the highest bid will win the player. That final bid number will be deducted from the winning team's draft budget. And normally this is with fake money. I believe on ESPN it's like $200, but I'm sure if you're in a league that does this in person, that they'll actually use an entry fee. So it works out. If you're new to fantasy football or don't want to dedicate a lot of time, a snake draft league is the way to go. And you can do any of these formats online or in person. If you're playing with a group of friends, I actually highly recommend you play in person on a homemade draft board. It's a lot of fun and a really good excuse to get together and eat and drink and have a good time. What is a mock draft? Mock draft is a simulation of a fantasy sports league's draft. For fantasy purposes, they are very helpful in seeing what round players go, as well as getting a sense of how fantasy drafts work, especially if you're first time drafting. I highly recommend you take a couple mock drafts. What is the waiver wire? I'll get into this in another episode, but just to give you the laydown of what it is, the waiver wire is essentially an online board where teams can claim unclaimed players or fantasy free agents. And these free agents or waiver picks are temporarily frozen, giving everyone a chance to claim them. After a certain amount of time expires, all waiver claims will be processed, and the player is assigned to the manager with the highest waiver priority, which is usually determined by your win rate. So if you are last in your league, you usually get the priority. Managing the waiver wire is extremely important to your success in fantasy. Due to how rapidly changing football is with injuries, bye weeks, or downtrending players, it's a great place to dump your poorly performing players for good performing ones. Who is the fantasy commissioner and what do they do? The commissioner is the person who sets up the fantasy league. They set the draft date, handle the league fees, manage the players in the league, handle trades. They're basically the boss of the league. And if you ever have problems, either with collusion, or you want to get a deal done faster, and both teams agree, go to your fantasy commissioner. They're the ones in charge. They'll handle the situation. I guess last but not least, who gives the best fantasy advice? Well, me. Bullseye Fantasy. For the benefit of the people, though, I'll give you two experts that I do like, besides myself. Those experts would be Mike Clay and Field Yates from ESPN. You definitely go check them out, but don't expect them to answer your questions if you have them. These guys get a lot of questions all the time, and they can't physically answer all of them. Get a guy like myself who can answer questions at any time. Feel free to reach out. I'm always open and ready to answer questions. So that was it. That was the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of information out of it. Next episode will be on how to prep for your fantasy draft. So make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bullseye Fantasy. You subscribe to my website, the link is in the Twitter bio, and that you turn on your podcast notifications for Sounds Like Sam, wherever you get your podcasts. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to message me on Twitter or Instagram at Bullseye Fantasy, or email me at bullseyefantasy1@gmail.com, and that's one, the letter one, no wait, the number one. Alright, well thanks, and peace.